The Curse of the Hollow King. Briar Rathmore had always dreamed of a kingdom lost to time, of a ruined throne hidden beyond the veil of mist. She never thought it was real until she found it. The moment she stepped across the threshold, the torches blazed, the dust settled, and then a voice, deep and knowing, curled against her skin. "You are the last of them," the man murmured, stepping forward. His golden eyes gleamed in the dim light. "And that means you are mine." Chapter 1. The Whispers of Eldoria's Past. The rain lashed against the windows of Briar Rathmore's cottage, mirroring the tempest brewing inside her. At 57, Briar felt a restlessness she hadn't known since her youth, a yearning for something just beyond her grasp. It wasn't the quiet life of little Puddleton, nestled in the Cotswolds, that chafed. She loved the rolling hills, the scent of damp earth after a summer rain, the familiar faces at the village market. It was, rather, a persistent, nagging feeling of unbelonging, a sense that her life was a meticulously crafted puzzle with a crucial piece missing. Tonight, the feeling was particularly acute. Sleep had eluded her for weeks, replaced by fragmented dreams of a kingdom shrouded in mist, a crumbling castle silhouetted against a stormy sky, and a man's voice, deep and resonant, whispering her name. These weren't the fanciful dreams of a lonely widow. They felt real. Too real. She rose from the worn armchair by the fireplace, the embers glowing a dull orange, and walked to the window. The wind howled, bending the ancient oak tree in her garden almost double. Briar wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, a chill unrelated to the weather settling deep in her bones. She'd lived in this cottage for 30 years, ever since her husband, Thomas, had passed away. He had been a kind, steady man, a grounding force in her life. But even with Thomas, she'd sometimes felt this disconnect, as if she were living a life borrowed from someone else. Tonight, the dreams had been more vivid. She'd seen a silver ring, intricately carved with a wolf's head, lying on a velvet cushion. She'd felt the cold stone of the castle walls beneath her fingertips, smelled the damp, earthy scent of moss and decay. And the voice, it had been closer, clearer, sending shivers down her spine. "Briar," it had whispered, the sound seeming to emanate from the very air around her. "Come home." She shook her head, trying to dispel the lingering images. It was grief, she told herself. Delayed grief, perhaps, finally catching up with her. Or maybe it was simply the onset of, well, whatever came after middle age. Senility? She chuckled humorlessly. But the dreams had sparked something within her, a curiosity she couldn't ignore. For years, Briar had immersed herself in local history, fascinated by the folklore and legends of the Cotswolds. She knew every ancient standing stone, every hidden well, every whispered tale of fairies and forgotten kings. But none of it had ever resonated with her quite like these dreams. She went to her study, a small, cluttered room filled with books, maps, and historical documents. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather. She pulled down a dusty volume from the top shelf, its title barely legible, Legends of the Lost Kingdoms. The book fell open to a chapter titled Eldoria, The Kingdom Beyond the Mist. Briar began to read, her heart pounding in her chest. The text described a kingdom that had vanished centuries ago, swallowed by a mysterious fog and forgotten by the world. Its ruler, a powerful king known only as Alaric, had been betrayed and overthrown, his lineage cursed to wander the earth, lost and without a home. The legend spoke of a prophecy, a promise of Eldoria's return, heralded by the appearance of the last descendant of Alaric's line. A descendant who, according to the book, would bear a distinctive mark, a crescent moon-shaped birthmark just below the left collarbone. Briar's hand flew to her neck, her fingers tracing the familiar shape she'd always dismissed as a harmless imperfection. She stared at the page, her breath catching in her throat. The description of Eldoria in the book mirrored her dreams almost perfectly. The ruined castle, the mist-shrouded landscape, the sense of ancient power and sorrow. Could it be possible? Could her dreams be more than just fantasies? Could she, Briar Rathmore, ordinary widow of Little Puddleton, be connected to this lost kingdom? The thought was absurd, ludicrous. And yet she glanced at the map included in the book, a faded, hand-drawn depiction of the region. A small, almost imperceptible circle was marked near the border of Gloucestershire, labeled simply, the Vale. The text described it as the gateway to Eldoria, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. A sudden, inexplicable urge seized her. She had to see it. She had to know if there was any truth to these legends, to these dreams that had haunted her for weeks. She changed into sturdy walking boots and a thick coat, grabbed a flashlight and a compass, and slipped out into the storm. The wind whipped her hair around her face, the rain soaking through her clothes in minutes. But she didn't care. A sense of purpose, of destiny, had taken hold of her, driving her forward. As she drove towards the location marked on the map, the storm intensified. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, stark flashes, revealing rolling hills and ancient woodlands. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. She parked her car at the edge of a forest, the trees swaying ominously in the wind. The air here felt different, charged with an almost palpable energy. She followed a narrow, overgrown path, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The scent of pine and damp earth filled her nostrils, mingled with something else, something ancient and wild. Finally, she reached a clearing. And there it was, the Vale. It wasn't a physical barrier, but rather a shimmering, almost imperceptible distortion in the air, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. But this was different. This shimmered with an otherworldly light, a pale, ethereal glow that pulsed with a life of its own. Briar hesitated, her rational mind screaming at her to turn back. This was madness. She was a sensible woman, not some adventurer chasing after fairy tales. But the pull was too strong. The dreams, the book, the mark on her skin, it all pointed to this moment. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the unknown. The world around her seemed to dissolve, the storm fading into a silent, swirling mist. The air grew cold, and a sense of profound stillness settled over her. She was no longer in the Cotswolds. She was somewhere else. A figure emerged from the mist, tall and imposing, silhouetted against the faint, ethereal light. Briar's heart hammered against her ribs. She could not see features, but she should sense power. Dangerous power. The figure took a slow step forward, and then another. The faint smell of wood smoke and something akin to pine needles but wilder, stronger reached her. And then that voice. The voice from her dreams. "You're late, Briar Rathmore." She felt a pull, a visceral connection that defied logic and reason. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly inevitable, all at once. Chapter 2. Threshold of a Forgotten Realm. The voice was even more compelling in reality than it had been in her dreams. It resonated deep within her, vibrating in her bones, stirring something ancient and dormant within her soul. It was a voice that spoke of power, of sorrow, and of a connection that transcended time and space. Briar stood frozen, her flashlight beam trembling in her hand, illuminating only the lower half of the figure before her. He wore dark, rugged clothing, leather, she thought, and possibly furs that seemed to blend seamlessly with the swirling mist. His boots were heavy, and she could hear the faint crunch of leaves and twigs beneath them as he approached. Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice a shaky whisper. He stopped a few feet away, the mist swirling around him like a living cloak. Finally, he stepped fully into the light, and Briar's breath caught in her throat. He was magnificent. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but possessed of a raw, untamed beauty that was both breathtaking and terrifying. His face was sharp and angular, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline dusted with a dark stubble. His hair was long and black, tied back loosely at the nape of his neck, with a few strands escaping to frame his face. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of molten gold, flecked with amber and green, and they seemed to glow with an inner light. They were the eyes of a predator, yes, but also the eyes of a king. I am Alaric, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. King of Eldoria. And you, Briar Rathmore, are the key to its return. The words sent a shiver down her spine. King of Eldoria? The kingdom from her dreams, from the dusty old book? It was impossible. And yet, standing here, facing this man who exuded an aura of ancient power and authority, she couldn't deny the truth of it. I don't understand, she stammered. How can this be real? Alaric's golden eyes studied her intently, as if searching for something within her. You have felt it, haven't you? He asked. The pull of this place? The whispers of your ancestors? Briar nodded slowly, unable to tear her gaze away from his. The dreams, they are not dreams, Briar, he said, his voice softening slightly. They are memories. Echoes of a past you have forgotten, a life you have lived before. He took another step closer, and Briar instinctively recoiled. There was a wildness about him, a dangerous energy that both frightened and fascinated her. She could smell him now, that scent of wood smoke and pine, mingled with something else, something animalistic. It was a scent that stirred something primal within her, a deep, instinctive recognition. You are the last of my line, Alaric continued, his voice laced with a hint of sadness. The last descendant of the royal blood of Eldoria. The curse that has kept this kingdom hidden for centuries, it can only be broken by you. Briar shook her head, trying to make sense of his words. A curse? But how? The curse of Hollowfong, Alaric explained, his gaze darkening. A sorcerer who coveted my throne, betrayed me and cursed my bloodline. He sealed Eldoria away, trapping it in this in-between place, until the last of my descendants returned to claim their birthright. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and strong, and gently touched her cheek. Briar flinched at the contact, a jolt of electricity passing through her. His touch was surprisingly warm, a stark contrast to the cold, damp air around them. You bear the mark, he said, his thumb tracing the crescent moon-shaped birthmark below her collarbone. The mark of the royal line. The mark of Hollowfang's curse. Briar's hand went to her neck, her fingers touching the familiar mark. She'd always thought it was just a birthmark, a harmless imperfection. But now she understood. It was a symbol of her destiny, a link to a past she had never known. I don't know what to do, she whispered, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of his words. Alaric's golden eyes softened. He saw the fear in her eyes, the confusion, the doubt. But he also saw something else, a spark of courage, a flicker of the ancient power that flowed through her veins. You do not have to do anything you do not wish to, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. But Eldoria needs you, Briar. My people need you. And perhaps I need you too. That last statement, spoken with a vulnerability that belied his regal bearing, caught her off guard. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a king, but a man burdened by a terrible past, a man who had been alone for centuries, waiting for her. A strange feeling stirred within her, a mixture of fear, excitement, and something else. Something that felt dangerously close to attraction. Tell me, she said, her voice gaining strength. Tell me everything. He smiled, a slow, captivating smile that transformed his features, making him seem almost approachable. It is a long story, Briar Rathmore, he said, and one best told within the walls of my castle. Will you come with me? He extended his hand to her, an invitation and a challenge. Briar hesitated for only a moment, her rational mind warring with the undeniable pull of this strange, magical world. She looked at his hand, strong and calloused, a hand that had wielded power and fought battles. A hand that, she instinctively knew, could also be gentle. And then, she did something she hadn't done in years. She took a leap of faith. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, sending another jolt of energy through her. He gave her a reassuring nod, and together, they stepped deeper into the mist, leaving the familiar world behind and entering the forgotten realm of Eldoria. The path ahead was unclear, dangerous, and filled with the unknown. But as they walked, hand in hand, Briar felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had finally found the missing piece of her life. Perhaps she had found her home. Chapter 3. The King's Decree of Possession. The mist swirled and parted as they walked, revealing a landscape that was both breathtakingly beautiful and hauntingly desolate. Towering trees, their branches gnarled and twisted, reached towards the sky like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, mingled with the faintest hint of wood smoke. There was a profound silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional cry of an unseen bird. Briar felt a shiver run down her spine. This wasn't the picturesque beauty of the Cotswolds. This was a wilder, more ancient place, a place where magic still lingered in the air. Alaric walked beside her, his hand still firmly clasped in hers. His presence was a source of both comfort and unease. He was a stranger, a king from a lost kingdom, a man who claimed she was the key to his destiny. And yet, she felt an undeniable connection to him, a sense of familiarity that defied logic. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the stillness. "To my castle," Alaric replied. "Or what remains of it. Hollowfang's curse took much from us, but it could not destroy everything." He glanced at her, his golden eyes searching hers. "Are you afraid, Briar?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not afraid, exactly, but overwhelmed. This is all so unbelievable." He smiled, a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "I understand. It is a lot to take in. But I promise you, I will explain everything. And I will protect you." His words, spoken with such quiet confidence, sent a warmth spreading through her chest. She found herself believing him, trusting him, despite the strangeness of the situation. As they continued walking, the mist began to thin, revealing glimpses of crumbling stone walls and towering turrets. Finally, they emerged into a large clearing, and Briar gasped. Before her stood the ruins of a once magnificent castle. It was a breathtaking sight, even in its state of decay. Massive stone walls, overgrown with ivy and moss, rose towards the sky. Towers, some intact, others crumbling, stood sentinel against the misty landscape. The architecture was unlike anything she had ever seen, a blend of Romanesque and Gothic styles, with intricate carvings and arched windows. "Aldoria Castle," Alaric said, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "My home, or what was once my home." He led her towards the main entrance, a massive arched gateway that was partially blocked by fallen stones. They stepped over the rubble and entered a large courtyard, overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. The silence here was even more profound, broken only by the gentle whisper of the wind. "It's beautiful," Briar said, her voice filled with awe. "Even like this?" Alaric nodded. "It was once even more so. A place of light and laughter, of feasts and celebrations. Hollowfang's curse stole all of that." He led her through the ruined courtyard, pointing out the remnants of various structures, the stables, the kitchens, the great hall. He spoke of his kingdom, of his people, of the life that had once thrived here. His words painted a vivid picture of Aldoria's past, a past that felt strangely familiar to Briar. They reached a relatively intact section of the castle, a large, circular tower that seemed to have withstood the ravages of time and the curse. Alaric pushed open a heavy wooden door, its hinges groaning in protest. They stepped inside, and Briar found herself in a dimly lit chamber. The air here was warmer, and the scent of wood smoke was stronger. A fire crackled merrily in a large stone fireplace, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The chamber was sparsely furnished, with a few rough-hewn wooden chairs, a table, and a large tapestry depicting a scene of a wolf hunting a stag. "This is my sanctuary," Alaric said, gesturing around the room. "One of the few places in the castle that remains untouched by the curse." He walked to the fireplace and added another log, the flames leaping higher. He then turned to her, his golden eyes intense. Now, Briar, he said, his voice taking on a more formal tone. It is time for me to explain the full extent of your involvement in Eldoria's fate. He paused, then took a deep breath. As I said, you are the last of my line. The prophecy states that only the last descendant of Alaric's blood can break Hollowfang's curse. But it is not simply a matter of your presence here. There is a ritual. A binding. Briar frowned. A binding? What kind of binding? Alaric hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. A soul bond, he said quietly. A magical connection between two souls, forged through ancient magic. The prophecy states that the curse can only be broken when the last descendant of Alaric willingly bonds their soul to mine. Briar stared at him, her mind reeling. A soul bond? With him? It was insane. And yet, a part of her, a deep, instinctive part, felt a strange pull towards the idea.
But why?
She asked.
Why a soul bond?
Because, Alaric said, his voice laced with a hint of desperation, Hollowfang's curse was not just upon my kingdom.
It was upon me.
It twisted my magic, my very being. The soul bonded is the only way to restore my power, to break the curse that holds me captive, as much as it holds Eldoria. He stepped closer to her, his golden eyes pleading. Briar, I understand this is a lot to ask. It is a sacrifice. But it is the only way. Without the soul bond, Eldoria will remain lost forever. And I will remain trapped in this half-life. He reached out and took her hands, his touch sending another jolt of electricity through her.
I know I am a stranger to you, he said.
But I feel a connection to you. A connection that goes beyond the prophecy, beyond the curse. I believe we are meant to be together, Briar. Not just as king and key, but as something more. His gaze was unwavering, intense, commanding. You are mine, Briar, by right of birth, and by the decree of this kingdom, and by the magic that flows within us both. Accept this, and we will free Eldoria. Together. The weight of his words, the power in his eyes, the sheer force of his presence, was almost overwhelming. Briar felt a tremor run through her, a mixture of fear, desire, and a strange, undeniable sense of destiny. She stared in his eyes. She was trapped. Chapter 4. Echoes of a Lost Lineage. Briar pulled her hands away from Alaric's, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over her. His words echoed in her mind. You are mine. It was a possessive claim, a king's decree, and yet it resonated with something deep within her, a primal recognition that both thrilled and terrified her.
Mean it?
She repeated, her voice trembling slightly. I am not a possession, Alaric. I am a woman, with my own life, my own will. His golden eyes softened, a flicker of regret crossing his features. I know, he said quietly, and I apologize if my words offended you. It is difficult for me to express myself in ways that are not of this kingdom. I've been alone for so long, ruling over ruins and shadows. I have forgotten the courtesies of a different world. He ran a hand through his long, dark hair, a gesture that seemed surprisingly human, surprisingly vulnerable. But the truth remains, Briar. The prophecy, the curse it binds us together, whether you like it or not. She looked around the chamber, at the flickering firelight, the ancient tapestry, the rough-hewn furniture. It was a world so different from her own, and yet it felt strangely familiar. The dreams, the whispers, the pull of this place, it was all starting to make sense. Tell me more about this prophecy, she said, her voice gaining strength. Tell me about my lineage, about my ancestors. Alaric nodded, a hint of relief in his eyes. He gestured towards the chairs by the fireplace. Sit, please. This may take some time. They sat facing each other, the fire crackling between them. Alaric began to speak, his voice low and resonant, weaving a tale of a kingdom that had once been glorious and powerful. He spoke of his ancestors, of kings and queens who had ruled Eldoria with wisdom and courage. He spoke of their magic, a powerful force that flowed through their blood, connecting them to the land and its people. He described Briar's great-grandmother, a woman named Lyra, who had been a princess of Eldoria. She had been known for her beauty, her intelligence, and her fierce independence. She had also possessed a rare gift, the ability to see glimpses of the future. Lyra foresaw Hollowfang's betrayal, Alaric said, his voice filled with sorrow. She warned me, but I did not listen. I was too proud, too confident in my own power. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the tapestry on the wall. She tried to escape, to take a part of our history, our bloodline, away from this place before Hollowfang sealed it, with the aid of a trusted knight. She took a few loyal followers with her, fleeing through the veil, hoping to preserve our lineage in the outside world. My grandmother, Briar whispered, realizing the connection. Alaric nodded. She never spoke of Eldoria. Did she? Briar shook her head.
No.
She died when I was young. My mother, she never mentioned anything either. But I always felt different, like I didn't belong. The magic of Eldoria runs strong in your blood, Briar, Alaric said. Even diluted through generations, it still calls to you. It is why you had the dreams, why you were drawn to this place. He continued his story, explaining how Lyra had settled in the Cotswolds, marrying a local man and starting a new life. She had hidden her true identity, fearing that Hollowfang's influence might reach beyond the veil. She had passed down the silver ring, the one Briar had seen in her dreams, to her daughter, and then to her granddaughter. The ring, Alaric said, it is a symbol of our lineage, a link to Eldoria. It also possesses a small amount of magic, enough to protect its wearer from certain influences. Briar remembered the ring, a family heirloom she had always treasured. She had worn it often, feeling a strange sense of comfort and connection whenever it was on her finger. She had given it to a charity shop after a particularly bad spell of grief after Thomas died. A wave of regret washed over her. I don't have it anymore, she confessed. Alaric's expression didn't change. It matters not. The important thing is that you are here. You are the last of Lyra's line, the last of my line, and you are the only one who can break the curse. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. The soul bond, it is not just about restoring my power, Briar. It is about restoring Eldoria, about bringing life back to this land, about freeing my people from their slumber. Slumber? Briar asked, confused. Hollowfang's curse did not kill everyone, Alaric explained. It suspended them. They are trapped between worlds, neither living nor dead, waiting for the curse to be broken. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the misty landscape. They are all around us, Briar. Sleeping in the trees, in the stones, in the very air we breathe. Waiting for you. Briar felt a shiver run down her spine. The thought of an entire kingdom, suspended in time, waiting for her, it was overwhelming. She stood up and joined him at the window, looking out at the desolate beauty of Eldoria. She could almost feel the presence of the sleeping kingdom, a silent, expectant energy that pressed against her. She turned to Alaric, her heart filled with a strange mixture of fear and determination. She was still unsure, still hesitant, but she knew she couldn't turn her back on this. This was her heritage, her destiny. What would this soul bond entail? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alaric turned to face her, his expression serious. It is a joining of souls, Briar. A merging of our magic, our essence. It will bind us together, forever. We will share each other's thoughts, each other's feelings, each other's lives. He paused, then added, his voice softer, it is also a joining of bodies. A consummation of the bond. He stepped toward her, so very near. He smelled of the forest and fire, of magic, and something uniquely him. The choice laid before her. But it did not feel like a choice at all. It is the only way to break Hollowfang's curse, my Briar, he said, his eyes burning into her. The words ignited something within her. Something fierce and ancient. Something that had been waiting, dormant, for a very long time. It called to her now. Chapter 5. The Curse of Hollowfang's Binding. The air in the chamber seemed to thicken, charged with a palpable energy. Alaric's words hung between them, a heavy weight of expectation and inevitability. A joining of bodies. The phrase, so stark and yet so intimate, sent a shiver through Briar. It was a concept both terrifying and strangely alluring. She looked at Alaric, at his intense golden eyes, his strong jawline, the raw, untamed beauty that both frightened and fascinated her. He was a king, a warrior, a man from a different world. And yet, she felt an undeniable connection to him, a pull that defied logic and reason. Forever, she whispered, repeating the word he had used. That's a long time. Alaric nodded, his expression serious. It is. But it is also the nature of the bond. It is not something to be taken lightly, Briar. It is a commitment, a sacrifice, on both our parts. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. I know this is a lot to ask of you. I know it is frightening. But I promise you, I will not force you. I will not coerce you. The choice must be yours, freely given. His words, spoken with such sincerity, eased some of her fear. She searched his eyes, looking for any sign of deception, any hint of manipulation. But she found only honesty and a vulnerability that belied his regal bearing. Tell me about Holofong, she said, changing the subject slightly. Why did he do this? Why did he betray you? Alaric's jaw tightened, his golden eyes flashing with anger. He was my closest advisor, he said, his voice laced with bitterness. My most trusted friend. But he was consumed by envy, by a lust for power that I did not see until it was too late. He released her face and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. He coveted my throne, my magic, my connection to the land. He believed he was more deserving, more powerful. He spent years studying forbidden magic, dark arts that twisted his mind and corrupted his soul. He turned back to her, his expression filled with sorrow. He orchestrated a rebellion, gathering followers who were discontented with my rule. He attacked when I was least expecting it, using a powerful curse that he had crafted specifically to neutralize me. Neutralize you? Briar asked. He could not kill me, Alaric explained. My magic was too strong, too deeply rooted in the land. But he could bind me. He trapped me in a state of suspended animation, neither fully alive nor fully dead. He sealed Eldoria away, trapping it in this in-between place, and scattered my people, condemning them to a similar fate. He paused, then added, his voice filled with a hint of desperation. The curse he placed upon me, it also affects my physical form. I am diminished, Briar. I am not what I once was. The soul bond, it is the only way to restore my full power, to break the curse that holds me captive. He stepped closer to her again, his gaze intense. Holofong believed that by cursing my bloodline, he would ensure that Eldoria would never return. He believed that the last descendant of my line would be weak, unwilling to make the sacrifice required to break the curse. He was wrong. His eyes locked onto hers. The magic remembers the curse, even if you do not, Briar. Holofong sought to bind. And so, to unbind, we must bind also. He trailed a finger across the sensitive skin just above the hollow of her throat. He wanted to control, to dominate. He craved that above all else. He tilted his head, that slight, feral smile playing about his lips. But I merely want to share. Briar felt a tremor run through her. His words, his touch, the sheer force of his presence, were almost overwhelming. She was torn between fear and desire, between her rational mind and the undeniable pull of this strange, magical world. She thought of her quiet life in Little Puddleton, of her cottage, her garden, her friends. It seemed a lifetime ago, a distant memory fading rapidly in the face of this overwhelming reality. She thought of Thomas, her late husband. A good man, a kind man. But their love had been gentle, comfortable. It had never ignited the kind of fire that Alaric sparked within her, a fire that both terrified and exhilarated her. She looked at Alaric again, at his golden eyes, his strong features, the raw, untamed power that emanated from him. He was a king, a warrior, a man who had been alone for centuries, waiting for her. And she, Briar Rathmore, ordinary widow of Little Puddleton, was the key to his destiny, the key to the restoration of his kingdom, the key to his heart. A strange sense of peace settled over her. She knew what she had to do. "I understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I understand the sacrifice, and I am willing to make it." A flicker of surprise crossed Alaric's features, followed by a surge of relief and something else. Something that looked dangerously close to love. "You're sure, Briar?" he asked, his voice husky. "You understand what this means?" She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I do. I am ready." He reached out and took her hands, his fingers intertwining with hers. His touch was warm and strong, sending a jolt of energy through her. "Then let us begin," he said, his voice filled with a solemn intensity. "Let us break the curse of Holofong and restore Eldoria to its former glory. Together." His gaze held her captive, a silent promise of a future unknown, a future filled with both danger and the undeniable allure of a love that transcended time and space. The fire crackled merrily, almost as it approved of her decision, as if the room held a secret breath and waited. Chapter 6. Unveiling the Ancient Prophecy. Alaric led Briar to a small, alcove-like space off the main chamber. It was clearly a place of power, a focal point for the magic that still lingered within the castle. The walls were lined with ancient symbols, carved into the stone with meticulous detail. In the center of the alcove stood a raised dais, made of smooth, dark stone. Upon it rested a large, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. "This is the Book of Eldoria," Alaric said, his voice hushed with reverence. "It contains the history of our kingdom, our laws, our magic, and the prophecy of Holofang's curse." He carefully opened the book, its pages rustling softly in the silence. He turned to a specific page, marked with a faded ribbon. The text was written in an ancient script, a language Briar didn't recognize. But as Alaric began to read aloud, the words seemed to translate themselves in her mind, as if the magic of Eldoria itself was bridging the gap between their worlds. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the alcove, reciting the words of the prophecy. "When the Wolf King falls, betrayed by serpent's guile, and Eldoria fades, lost to time's cruel wile, a curse shall fall, on land and royal blood, trapped between worlds, misunderstood. The last descendant, marked by lunar grace, shall find the kingdom, in this hidden place. With willing heart and soul unbound, a bond shall form, on sacred ground. Through shared magic and bodies entwined, the curse shall break, the kingdom unbind. But should they fail, or choose to flee, Eldoria's fate forever shall be lost to the mist, a forgotten dream, and Holofang's triumph shall reign supreme." Briar listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. The words of the prophecy were both beautiful and terrifying, outlining the stakes of her decision with stark clarity. It was a heavy burden, a responsibility she hadn't asked for, and yet she felt a strange sense of purpose, of belonging. "So, it's all true," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The dreams, the book, everything." Alaric nodded. "The prophecy has guided my actions for centuries," he said. "It has kept me hopeful, even in the darkest of times." He closed the book and placed it back on the dais. He then turned to her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation.
"The ritual, it is not complicated," he said.
"But it requires complete trust, complete surrender." He explained the steps, his voice low and serious. They would stand together on the dais, hand in hand. He would recite an ancient incantation, drawing upon the magic of Eldoria, the magic that flowed through both their veins. He would then mark her. "Mark me?" Briar asked, her brow furrowing. "A symbol of our bond," Alaric explained. "A physical manifestation of the connection between our souls. It will appear near where the curse already marked you." He gently touched the crescent moon birthmark below her collarbone. Briar felt a shiver run down her spine. The thought of being marked, of being permanently bound to Alaric, was both daunting and strangely exciting. "And then?" she asked. "Then," Alaric said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. We will consummate the bond. We will join our bodies, our magic, our essence. It is the final step, the act that will break the curse and restore Eldoria. He paused, then added, his voice husky. It is not just about the ritual, Briar. It is about desire, about the connection between us. It is about love. He reached out and gently caressed her cheek, his touch sending a warmth spreading through her. I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you to know I do not see you merely as a means to an end. I care for you, Briar. I have felt your presence in my dreams, in my thoughts, for centuries. You are more than just the last descendant of my line. You are you. His words, spoken with such raw emotion, touched her deeply. She looked into his eyes, and she saw not just a king, but a man who had been alone for far too long, a man who yearned for connection, for companionship, for love. And she, Briar Rathmore, felt it too. A burgeoning affection, a deep, undeniable attraction that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. It was a love born of magic, of destiny, of a connection that had been forged centuries ago. I care for you too, Alaric, she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. I don't understand it, but I feel it. I feel connected to you, to this place. He smiled, a slow, captivating smile that transformed his features. Then let us not waste any more time, he said. Let us begin the ritual. Let us break this curse and start our new life together. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. He led her to the dais, and they stood together, facing each other, bathed in the soft glow of the ancient symbols. Alaric began to chant, his voice low and resonant, the words of the incantation echoing through the alcove. Briar felt a surge of energy, a tingling sensation that spread through her body. The air around them seemed to shimmer, and the symbols on the walls began to glow with an otherworldly light. She closed her eyes, trusting him, surrendering to the magic, to the destiny that had brought them together. She felt his hand tighten around hers, a reassuring presence in the midst of the swirling energy. The chanting grew faster. The feeling grew. She was on a precipice. She felt his other hand come up to rest against her skin, just beneath her collarbone. It is time, my Briar, his voice rasped, his breath warm against her ear. And as the final word escaped his lips, she waited for magic to overtake her. Chapter 7. Shadows of Doubt and Desire. As Alaric's chanting reached its crescendo, Briar felt a sharp, stinging pain just below her collarbone, near her birthmark. She gasped, her eyes flying open. He had stopped chanting and was now looking at her, his golden eyes filled with concern. Are you all right? He asked, his voice laced with worry. Briar touched the spot where she had felt the pain. Her fingers came away with a trace of blood. She looked at her hand, then at Alaric. What was that? She asked. He gently took her hand and examined her skin. There, next to her crescent moon birthmark, was a new mark, a small, intricate symbol of a wolf's head, similar to the carving on the ring she had dreamt of. It was still raw and slightly bleeding. The mark of our bond, Alaric explained. A physical manifestation of the connection between our souls. It is permanent. Briar stared at the mark, a mixture of awe and trepidation filling her. It was beautiful, in a way, but also a reminder of the irreversible step she had taken. It had hurt, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Alaric's expression softened. I know, he said. It is a necessary part of the ritual. But the pain will fade, and the bond it will bring us strength, connection, and pleasure. He gently kissed the mark, his lips warm against her skin. Briar shivered at the contact, a wave of heat spreading through her. It was a gesture of tenderness, of reassurance, and of possession. He then stepped back, his gaze sweeping over her. Now, he said, his voice husky, comes the final step, the consummation of our bond. He began to unbutton his shirt, his movements slow and deliberate. Briar watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen a man quite like him. He was all lean muscle and hard angles, his body a testament to centuries of survival, of battles fought and won. There was a raw, untamed beauty about him that both frightened and fascinated her. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks. She was a widow, yes, but it had been a long time since she had been with a man. And Alaric, he was unlike any man she had ever known. He saw her hesitation, her nervousness. He stopped unbuttoning his shirt and reached out to her, gently cupping her face in his hands. "Briar," he said, his voice soft, "you do not have to do anything you do not want to. I will not force you. The choice is still yours." His words, spoken with such sincerity, eased some of her fear. But they also sparked a flicker of doubt. Was she truly ready for this? Was she ready to give herself completely to this man, to this strange, magical world? She looked into his eyes, and she saw not just desire, but also vulnerability. He was a king, yes, but he was also a man who had been alone for centuries, a man who yearned for connection, for companionship. And she, Briar Rathmore, felt that yearning too. A deep, primal need for intimacy, for belonging, for love. But there was something else holding her back. A nagging feeling of unease, a whisper of doubt that she couldn't quite ignore. It was the prophecy, the curse, the soul bond. It all felt so predetermined, so inevitable. "Alaric," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I need a moment. I need to think." He frowned, a flicker of disappointment crossing his features. "Think," he repeated. "About what?" "About everything," she said. "About the prophecy, about the curse, about us. It all feels so rushed, so forced." His expression hardened slightly. "Forced?" he said. "I have told you, Briar, the choice is yours. I am not forcing you to do anything." "But the prophecy," she began. "The prophecy is a guide, not a prison," Alaric interrupted. "It outlines the path, but it does not dictate every step. We still have free will, Briar. We still have choices." He paused, then added, his voice softer, "I understand your hesitation. You are from a different world, a world where such things are uncommon. But I assure you, Briar, this is not about control. It is about connection, about love." He reached out and gently stroked her hair, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "I have waited for you for centuries, Briar. I have dreamt of you, yearned for you. And now that you are here, I do not want to lose you. I do not want to rush you. But I also do not want to waste any more time." His words, his touch, the sheer intensity of his gaze, were almost overwhelming. Briar felt herself swaying, her resolve weakening. She wanted to believe him, she wanted to trust him, she wanted to surrender. But the doubt lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of her mind. What if she was wrong? What if this wasn't love, but manipulation? What if she was just a pawn in a centuries-old game? She looked at the mark on her skin, the wolf's head, a symbol of their bond. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also a brand, a mark of ownership. She closed her eyes, her head spinning, and backed away, putting space between them. She needed to decide. But the decision did not feel like hers to make. "Please, Alaric," she said. "Just give me a moment." She had to get away from him, just for a second. To think. Alaric, after a long, breathless pause, merely nodded. Chapter 8. The Price of a Stolen Crown. Briar stepped away from Alaric, from the dais, from the intensity of his gaze. She needed air, space to think, to process the whirlwind of emotions that were consuming her. She walked back into the main chamber, to the window where they had stood earlier, looking out at the misty landscape of Eldoria. The silence of the chamber, broken only by the crackling fire, was a stark contrast to the turmoil within her. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had settled deep in her bones. It wasn't just the cold of this strange, magical world, it was the cold of uncertainty, of doubt, of a fear that she couldn't quite name. She looked out at the ruined castle, at the mist-shrouded landscape, and a wave of loneliness washed over her. She was so far from home, so far from everything she had ever known. She had stepped through a veil, into a world of magic and prophecy, of ancient curses and soul bonds. And she had done it willingly, driven by a yearning for something she couldn't quite define. But now, standing here, alone, she questioned everything. Was she truly ready for this? Was she ready to give herself completely to Alaric, to this kingdom, to this destiny? She thought of her life in Little Puddleton, of her quiet cottage, her garden, her friends. It seemed a lifetime ago, a distant memory fading rapidly in the face of this overwhelming reality. She had been content, hadn't she? Or had she simply been resigned? She thought of Thomas, her late husband. A good man, a kind man. But their love had been gentle, comfortable. It had never ignited the kind of fire that Alaric sparked within her, a fire that both terrified and exhilarated her. But was it love? Or was it simply magic? The pull of the prophecy, the curse, the soul bond, it all felt so predetermined. So inevitable. Was she truly making her own choices, or was she simply following a script written centuries ago? She remembered Alaric's words. The prophecy is a guide, not a prison. But was that true? Or was he simply manipulating her, using her to break the curse and restore his kingdom? She thought of Holofong, the sorcerer who had betrayed Alaric, who had coveted his throne, his power. What if Alaric was similar? What if he was also driven by a lust for power, a desire to control? She remembered the way he had looked at her, the possessiveness in his voice when he had said, "You are mine." It had sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of excitement and fear. She touched the mark on her skin, the wolf's head, a symbol of their bond. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also a brand, a mark of ownership. A sudden thought struck her, a realization that sent a jolt of fear through her. The prophecy, it spoke of a soul bond, of a joining of bodies. But it didn't say anything about love. What if the soul bond wasn't about love at all? What if it was simply a means to an end? A way for Alaric to regain his power, to restore his kingdom, regardless of her feelings? She remembered the way he had described Holofang's curse, how it had diminished him, trapped him in a state of suspended animation. He had said the soul bond was the only way to restore his full power. But what if that power corrupted him? What if, once he had regained his full strength, he no longer needed her? What if he discarded her? The thought was terrifying, a cold wave of dread washing over her. She had been so caught up in the magic, in the romance, in the destiny of it all, that she hadn't stopped to consider the potential consequences. She had been so eager to escape her ordinary life, to find something more, that she had blindly walked into a trap. She looked back at the alcove, at the entrance to the chamber where Alaric waited. She could feel his presence, his power, his expectation. She couldn't go back there. Not yet. Not until she had sorted through her doubts, her fears, her confusion. She needed to find answers. She needed to understand the true nature of the prophecy, of the curse, of the soul bond. She needed to know if Alaric was truly the man she believed him to be, or if he was something else. She turned away from the window and walked towards the opposite end of the chamber, towards a narrow, winding staircase that led upwards. She didn't know where it led, but she had to go somewhere, anywhere, away from Alaric, away from the pressure of his presence. She began to climb the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The air grew colder, the darkness deeper. But she didn't care. She had to find her own truth, her own path, before she could surrender to anyone or anything. The price of Eldoria, she now realized, might be more than she had wanted to consider. She could lose herself in this strange and beautiful world. Chapter 9. A Kingdom in Ruins, a Heart in Bloom. The winding staircase led Briar to a higher level of the tower, to a small, circular room that had once been a study or a library. The walls were lined with empty bookshelves, their wood cracked and decayed. A large, arched window offered a panoramic view of the ruined castle and the mist-shrouded landscape. The air here was colder, and a thin layer of dust covered everything. But there was a sense of peace in this forgotten room, a quiet solitude that allowed Briar to finally gather her thoughts. She walked to the window and looked out at the kingdom of Eldoria. It was a breathtaking sight, even in its state of decay. The massive stone walls, the towering turrets, the intricate carvings, it was a testament to the grandeur of a lost civilization. But it was also a reminder of the price of power, of the consequences of betrayal, of the fragility of even the most magnificent of kingdoms. She thought of Alaric, of his golden eyes, his strong features, the raw, untamed power that emanated from him. She had been drawn to him, yes, but she had also been intimidated. She had allowed herself to be swept away by the romance, by the destiny, by the magic of it all. But now, standing here alone, she realized that she had been neglecting her own needs, her own desires, her own intuition. She had been so eager to escape her ordinary life, to find something more, that she had forgotten to ask herself the most important question: what did she want? Did she want to be queen of a ruined kingdom? Did she want to be bound, forever, to a man she barely knew? Did she want to spend the rest of her life fighting a centuries-old curse? The answer, she realized, was not a simple yes or no.
It was more complicated than that.
She did feel a connection to Alaric, a deep, undeniable attraction that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. She did feel a sense of belonging in Eldoria, a strange familiarity that resonated with something deep within her soul. But she also valued her independence, her autonomy, her freedom. She had spent most of her life living for others, first for her parents, then for her husband, then for her community. She had always put the needs of others before her own. But now, for the first time in her life, she had the opportunity to choose her own path, to define her own destiny. And she wasn't going to let anyone, not even a king from a lost kingdom, dictate that to her. She decided that she needed to learn more about Eldoria, about its history, its culture, its magic. She needed to understand the true nature of the curse, of the soul bond, before she could make a fully informed decision. She also needed to get to know Alaric better, to see beyond the king, the warrior, the prophecy. She needed to understand his motivations, his desires, his heart. She turned away from the window and began to explore the room. She ran her fingers along the empty bookshelves, imagining the books that had once filled them, the knowledge they had contained. She found a small, wooden chest tucked away in a corner. It was locked, but the lock was old and rusty. She managed to pry it open with a piece of broken stone she found on the floor. Inside the chest, she found a collection of scrolls, tied together with faded ribbons. They were written in the same ancient script as the Book of Eldoria, but as she touched them, she felt a faint tingling sensation, and the words seemed to translate themselves in her mind. She carefully unrolled one of the scrolls and began to read. It was a personal journal, written by a woman named Lyra, Alaric's great-grandmother, Briar's ancestor. Lyra's words painted a vivid picture of life in Eldoria before the curse. She wrote of the beauty of the kingdom, of the festivals, the music, the magic. She wrote of her love for her people, for her family, for Alaric. But she also wrote of her fears, of her premonitions of Hollowfang's betrayal. She described his growing ambition, his obsession with power, his descent into darkness. She wrote of her decision to flee Eldoria, to take a part of their history, their bloodline, away from the curse. She wrote of her hope that one day, a descendant of her line would return to break the curse and restore the kingdom. But she also wrote of a warning about the soul bond. Briar's heart pounded in her chest as she read Lyra's words. The soul bond is a powerful magic, a joining of two souls. It can bring great strength, great connection, great pleasure. But it is also a dangerous magic. It can consume, it can control, it can destroy. It must be entered into with caution, with wisdom, with love. True love, not mere desire, not mere obligation. Briar reread the passage several times, her mind racing. Lyra's words confirmed her own doubts, her own fears. The soul bond was not just about breaking the curse, it was about love. True love. And she wasn't sure if what she felt for Alaric was true love. It was attraction, yes. It was connection, yes. It was destiny, yes. But was it love? She rolled up the scroll and placed it back in the chest. She had found some answers, but she still had more questions.
She needed to talk to Alaric.
She needed to tell him about her doubts, her fears, her reservations. She needed to know if he was willing to wait, to give her time, to earn her love. She closed the chest and stood up, feeling a renewed sense of determination. She was not going to be a pawn in anyone's game, not even a prophecy's. She was going to make her own choices, based on her own feelings, her own intuition. She walked back to the staircase and began to descend, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She was ready to face Alaric, to face the future, whatever it may hold. She was ready to fight for her own happiness, for her own destiny. A small smile played on her lips.
It was a start.
Chapter 10. The Ritual of Broken Chains. Briar found Alaric back in the main chamber, standing by the fireplace, his back to her. He was staring into the flames, his posture tense, his shoulders rigid. He seemed lost in thought, unaware of her presence. She hesitated for a moment, watching him. He looked vulnerable somehow, less like a king and more like a man burdened by a terrible weight. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Alaric," she said, her voice soft. He turned around, his golden eyes widening slightly in surprise. He had clearly been expecting her to return to the alcove, to complete the ritual. "Briar," he said, his voice a low rumble. You took your time." She nodded. "I needed to think, to process everything." He frowned, a flicker of concern crossing his features. "And? Have you processed?" She walked towards him, stopping a few feet away. She looked into his eyes, trying to gauge his emotions, his intentions. "I found something," she said, her voice gaining strength, "in a room upstairs. A journal, written by Lyra." His eyes widened. "Lyra's journal? I thought it was lost."
"It was hidden," she said, "in a chest."
She wrote about the prophecy, about the curse, about the soul bond. Alaric's expression hardened slightly. "And? What did she say?" Briar took a deep breath. "She said it was a powerful magic, a dangerous magic. She said it should only be entered into with true love. Not mere desire, not mere obligation." His gaze shifted away from hers, his jaw tightening. "And you believe what? That we do not have true love?" She hesitated. "I don't know, Alaric," she said honestly. "I feel a connection to you, a strong attraction. But love? I don't know if I'm ready to call it that."
"Not yet."
He turned back to the fireplace, staring into the flames again. "So, what are you saying, Briar? That you will not complete the ritual?" She walked closer to him, placing a hand gently on his arm. He flinched slightly at her touch, but he didn't pull away. "I'm saying I need time," she said. "I need to get to know you better, Alaric. Not just as a king, not just as the man from the prophecy, but as you. And you need to get to know me, Briar. A person, not some tool for you to use to achieve your own ends." He turned to face her, his golden eyes searching hers. "Time?" he repeated. "We do not have time, Briar. The curse, it weakens me. It weakens Eldoria. Every day that passes, we lose more. I understand that," she interrupted. "But I will not be rushed, Alaric. I will not be coerced. I need to make this decision freely, with a clear mind and an open heart." He sighed, running a hand through his long, dark hair. "I understand," he said, his voice softer. "I have been impatient. I have been focused on the curse, on the prophecy, on my own needs." He paused, then added, his voice laced with a hint of vulnerability. "I have been alone for so long, Briar, waiting for you, dreaming of you. And now that you are here, I am afraid of losing you, of losing everything." His words, spoken with such raw emotion, touched her deeply. She saw the pain in his eyes, the loneliness, the desperation. "I'm not going anywhere, Alaric," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm just asking for time, for understanding, for a chance to build something real, something lasting." He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly tender. "And what if, after this time, you decide you do not feel the same?" She looked into his eyes, and she saw not just fear, but also hope. A fragile, flickering hope that she could reciprocate his feelings. "Then I will leave," she said honestly. "I will return to my world, and you will find another way. He nodded slowly, his expression serious. And the curse?
I don't know, she said.
Perhaps there is another way. Perhaps Lyra's journal holds more answers. Or perhaps it is Eldoria's fate to remain lost. He closed his eyes for a moment, his grip on her face tightening slightly. Then, he opened them again, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of resignation and something else. Something that looked dangerously close to respect. "All right, Briar," he said, his voice husky. "I will give you the time you need. I will try to earn your trust, your affection, your love." He released her face and stepped back, a slight smile playing on his lips. "But do not think I will make it easy for you," he said. "I am a king, after all, and I am used to getting what I want." Briar smiled back, a genuine smile this time. "I wouldn't expect anything less," she said. He gestured towards the chairs by the fireplace.
"Come," he said.
"Let us talk. Let us get to know each other. As equals." They sat facing each other, the fire crackling between them. And for the first time since she had stepped through the veil, Briar felt a sense of hope. A hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she could find happiness in this strange, magical world. A hope that she could build a real, lasting connection with Alaric, a connection based on trust, on respect, on love. The chains of the ritual were momentarily broken. The fire grew higher, almost as if in anticipation of what was to come. The possibility. Chapter 11. Betrayal in the moonlit glade. The days that followed were a strange blend of the mundane and the magical. Briar and Alaric spent hours talking, sharing stories, exploring the ruined castle and the surrounding lands. They cooked meals together over the open fire, using ingredients Alaric had somehow managed to procure from the seemingly desolate landscape. They laughed, they argued, they connected. Briar learned more about Alaric's life before the curse, about his childhood, his training, his responsibilities as king. He spoke of his love for his people, for his kingdom, for the magic that flowed through his veins. He spoke of his betrayal by Holofong, of the pain, the anger, the loneliness he had endured for centuries. Alaric, in turn, learned about Briar's life in the Cotswolds, about her quiet existence, her marriage to Thomas, her work as a local historian. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions, offering insights, showing a side of himself that was surprisingly gentle, surprisingly human. Briar found herself drawn to him, more and more each day. She admired his strength, his resilience, his passion. She appreciated his intelligence, his humor, his vulnerability. She enjoyed his company, his conversation, his touch. The physical attraction between them was undeniable, a simmering tension that grew stronger with each passing day. They would often find themselves lingering in each other's gaze, their hands brushing accidentally, their bodies drawn together by an invisible force. But Briar held back, remembering Lyra's warning, remembering her own doubts. She needed to be sure, absolutely sure, before she surrendered to the soul bond, to the consummation of their connection. One evening, as they were walking through a moonlit glade near the castle, Alaric stopped and turned to her, his golden eyes intense. "Briar," he said, his voice husky, I cannot deny my feelings any longer. I care for you deeply, more than I have ever cared for anyone." He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "I know you need time, but I am falling in love with you, Briar. And I believe you feel it too." Briar's heart pounded in her chest. His words, spoken with such raw emotion, were both exhilarating and terrifying. She did feel it, the growing affection, the undeniable attraction, the connection. But before she could respond, a sudden noise broke the silence of the glade. A rustling in the bushes, a snapping of twigs. Alaric immediately tensed, his hand moving to the hilt of a sword he had started carrying with him. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice sharp. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, cloaked figure with a hood obscuring their face.
"Who are you?"
Alaric repeated, drawing his sword. The figure stepped forward, into the moonlight, and Briar gasped. It was a woman, tall and slender, with long, flowing silver hair. Her face was pale and beautiful, but her eyes were cold and hard, filled with a chilling intensity. "Hello, Alaric," she said, her voice smooth and melodious, but with an underlying hint of malice. "It's been a long time." Alaric stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Lyria?" he whispered. "But that's impossible."
"You're dead."
The woman smiled, a cruel, mocking smile.
"Dead?"
she repeated. "Not quite, my king. Thanks to Holofong." Briar felt a wave of confusion wash over her. Lyria? But Lyra was Alaric's great-grandmother. She had fled Eldoria centuries ago. This woman, she looked too young, too vibrant. What do you mean?" Alaric asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Holofong," the woman Lyria explained, "he didn't just curse you, Alaric. He rewarded those who served him well. He gave me a gift. The gift of extended life. The gift of power." She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on Alaric. "I have been waiting for this moment, Alaric. Waiting for you to break the curse. Waiting to claim what is rightfully mine." "Claim what?" Alaric asked, his voice rising in anger. "What are you talking about?" Lyria smiled again, that cruel, mocking smile. "The throne, Alaric," she said. "The power. The kingdom. Holofong promised it to me in exchange for my loyalty." She gestured towards Briar. "And you, my dear," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You are the key. The key to unlocking all that power. The key to my ascension." Briar felt a chill run down her spine. This woman, she was dangerous. She was evil. "You're lying," Alaric said, his voice shaking with rage. "Lyra would never betray me. She loved Eldoria. She loved me." Lyria laughed, a cold, heartless laugh.
"Lyra was a fool," she said.
"A weak, sentimental fool. She chose love over power. I made a different choice." She raised her hand, and Briar saw a flash of silver. A ring, identical to the one she had seen in her dreams, the one she had lost. "This ring," Lyria said, "it's not just a symbol of lineage, Alaric. It's a conduit for Holofang's magic. And now it's mine." She began to chant, her voice low and resonant, the words of an ancient incantation echoing through the glade. Briar felt a surge of dark energy, a cold, oppressive force that seemed to suck the very air from her lungs. Alaric cried out and lunged, the blade of his sword flashing in the moonlight, toward Lyria, his own blood. Chapter 12. The Huntress and the Hunted. Alaric's sword struck sparks against a shimmering barrier that suddenly appeared around Lyria, deflecting the blow. She laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the moonlit glade. "You cannot harm me, Alaric," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Holofang's magic protects me, and soon it will empower me." She continued chanting, her voice growing stronger, the dark energy intensifying. Briar felt a wave of dizziness, her vision blurring. She stumbled, her knees weakening. Alaric, seeing her distress, turned towards her, his expression filled with concern. "Briar," he cried. But Lyria seized the opportunity. She raised her hand, and a bolt of dark energy shot towards Alaric, striking him in the chest. He cried out in pain, staggering backwards, his sword falling from his grasp. "Alaric!" Briar screamed, rushing towards him. But Lyria was faster. She moved with an unnatural speed, appearing between them, blocking Briar's path. "Stay back, little descendant," Lyria said, her voice cold and menacing. "You are of no use to me yet." She turned her attention back to Alaric, who was struggling to rise, his body racked with pain. "The soul bond," Lyria said, her voice filled with a cruel triumph. "It's the key, isn't it? The key to breaking the curse, to restoring your power. But it's also a weakness, a vulnerability." She smiled, a slow, predatory smile. Holofong knew that. He planned for it. He knew that one day, a descendant of your line would return. And he knew that you would be drawn to them, that you would bond with them. She stepped closer to Alaric, her eyes gleaming with malice. "He gave me the power to sever that bond.
To steal your magic.
To claim the throne for myself. Briar felt a surge of fear, of desperation. She had to do something, anything, to help Alaric. But what? She had no magic, no weapons, no power. She looked around frantically, searching for something, anything, she could use. Her gaze fell upon Alaric's fallen sword, lying on the ground a few feet away. Without thinking, she lunged for it, grabbing the hilt and lifting it with all her strength. The sword was heavy, unwieldy, but she held it firmly, her hands trembling. "Stay away from him," she shouted at Lyria, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and defiance. Lyria turned towards her, her expression a mixture of amusement and annoyance.
"You?" she said, scoffing.
"You think you can stop me? You are nothing, little descendant. A weak, insignificant mortal." She raised her hand, preparing to unleash another bolt of dark energy. But before she could, Briar charged, swinging the sword with all her might. The blade struck Lyria's arm, drawing a gasp of pain and surprise. The shimmering barrier that had protected her earlier seemed to have weakened, or perhaps Briar's sheer desperation had given her strength. Lyria stumbled back, clutching her arm, her eyes filled with rage. "You dare?" she hissed. "You dare strike me?" She unleashed a wave of dark energy, throwing Briar backwards, sending her sprawling on the ground. The sword flew from her grasp, landing several feet away. Briar struggled to rise, her head spinning, her body aching. But she refused to give up. She crawled towards the sword, her fingers outstretched. Lyria, however, was faster. She stood over Briar, her eyes blazing with fury. "You should have stayed out of this," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Now you will pay the price." She raised her hand, preparing to deliver a final, deadly blow. But before she could, a roar of rage echoed through the glade. Alaric, despite his injuries, had risen to his feet. His eyes were blazing with a golden fire, his body radiating a powerful energy. "Get away from her," he roared, his voice filled with a primal fury. He lunged at Lyria, tackling her to the ground. They wrestled fiercely, their bodies locked in a desperate struggle. Briar, seeing her chance, scrambled to her feet and grabbed the sword again. She knew she couldn't defeat Lyria with brute force, but perhaps she could use the sword to disrupt her magic, to sever the connection to Hollowfang's power. She remembered Lyria's words, "This ring, it's a conduit for Hollowfang's magic." She looked at Lyria's hand, at the silver ring gleaming in the moonlight. That was her target. She waited for her opportunity, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, as Alaric managed to briefly pin Lyria down, Briar struck. She brought the sword down with all her strength, aiming for Lyria's hand, for the ring. The blade struck true, severing the ring from Lyria's finger. A scream of pain and rage echoed through the glade, and a wave of dark energy exploded outwards, throwing Briar and Alaric back. When the dust settled, Lyria was gone. Only the severed ring remained, lying on the ground, its silver surface now dull and lifeless. Briar rushed to Alaric's side, her heart filled with relief and concern. He was injured, bruised, and bleeding, but he was alive. "Alaric," she cried, kneeling beside him. "Are you all right?" He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "Briar," he whispered, his voice weak. "You saved me." She smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "We saved each other," she said. He reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice filled with admiration.
"Brave.
Strong.
Fierce."
He paused, then added, his voice husky, "You are everything I ever dreamed of." Briar's heart swelled with emotion. She leaned down and kissed him, a soft, tender kiss that spoke of gratitude, of relief, of love. It was a love born not of prophecy, not of obligation, but of shared experience, of mutual respect, of a connection that had been forged in the crucible of danger and betrayal. A huntress, and the one she now hunted for. Chapter 13. Whispers among the ancient stones. The immediate danger had passed, but the threat of Lyria remained, a dark cloud hanging over their newfound peace. They returned to the castle, tending to their wounds and trying to make sense of what had happened. Alaric, though weakened by Lyria's attack, was slowly recovering, his inherent magic aiding his healing. Briar, despite her lack of magical abilities, had proven to be resourceful and resilient, a strength that surprised even herself. She took the ring, Alaric said, his voice still laced with pain, as Briar cleaned and bandaged a gash on his arm. Lyra's ring, the conduit to Hollowfang's magic. But you said Hollowfang was gone, Briar replied, her brow furrowing. How can his magic still be a threat? Alaric sighed, running a hand through his long, dark hair. Hollowfang's physical form may be gone, but his magic it lingers. It's tied to Eldoria, to the curse, to certain objects. Like Lyra's ring. He paused, then added, his voice filled with a grim determination. She will be back, Briar. She wants the throne, the power, and she will not stop until she gets it. Briar felt a shiver run down her spine. Lyria's cold, ruthless eyes, her cruel smile, her power, it was a terrifying prospect. What can we do? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Alaric looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of concern and resolve. We need to understand her plan, he said. We need to find out how she intends to use Hollowfang's magic. And we need to prepare. He suggested they consult the Book of Eldoria again, hoping to find more information about Lyra's betrayal, about Hollowfang's magic, about any weaknesses they could exploit. They returned to the alcove, the place of power where the ancient book rested. Alaric carefully opened the book, its pages rustling softly in the silence. He turned to the section on Hollowfang, his fingers tracing the ancient script. There is mention here of a ritual, he said, his voice hushed with concentration. A ritual Hollowfang used to enhance his power, to bind others to his will. He continued reading, his brow furrowing. It involves ancient stones, he said. Stones imbued with Eldoria's magic. Stones scattered throughout the kingdom. Briar remembered the prophecy, the line that spoke of a bond formed on sacred ground. Could these stones be the sacred ground? Do you know where these stones are? She asked. Alaric nodded. There are legends, he said. Whispers among the ruins. I have sensed them, at times, but I have never sought them out. I was too focused on the soul bond. He looked at her, his expression apologetic. I was wrong, Briar, he said. I was so blinded by the prophecy, by my own desperation, that I neglected other possibilities. Other paths. Briar placed a comforting hand on his arm. It's all right, Alaric, she said. We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them. He smiled, a grateful smile. You are wise, Briar, he said. Wiser than I. They spent the rest of the day poring over the Book of Eldoria, searching for clues, for any information that could help them. They discovered that the ancient stones were not just sources of power, but also amplifiers. They could amplify any magic, good or evil, that was channeled through them. Lyria intends to use these stones, Alaric said, his voice filled with a grim realization. She intends to amplify Hollowfang's magic, to strengthen the curse, to make herself unstoppable. Briar felt a surge of fear, but also a surge of determination. They couldn't let that happen. They had to stop her. We need to find these stones, she said. We need to destroy them, or somehow use them against her. Alaric nodded. The Book of Eldoria mentions a specific location, he said. A place called the Whispering Glade. It is said to be the heart of Eldoria's magic. The place where the most powerful stone resides. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. It is a dangerous journey, Briar, he said. Lyria will likely be there, waiting for us. And the glade itself, it is said to be guarded by ancient spirits. Briar felt a shiver run down her spine, but she met his gaze with unwavering determination. We have to try, Alaric, she said. We have no other choice. He smiled, a slow, captivating smile that transformed his features. You are fearless, Briar, he said. Truly fearless. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch sending a warmth spreading through her. "I am honored to have you by my side," he said, his voice husky.
To fight alongside you.
"To love you." Briar's heart swelled with emotion. She leaned in and kissed him, a passionate kiss that spoke of their shared danger, their shared determination, their growing love. They knew the road ahead would be perilous, filled with challenges and uncertainties. But they were ready to face it together. They were ready to fight for Eldoria, for their future, for their love. They were ready to seek out what whispered among the ancient stones, and hope they were strong enough to endure it. Chapter 14. The Serpent's Kiss, the Wolf's Embrace. The journey to the Whispering Glade was arduous and fraught with peril. Eldoria, even in its ruined state, was a land of wild beauty and hidden dangers. They traversed mist-shrouded forests, climbed treacherous cliffs, and navigated through crumbling ruins, always watchful, always wary of Lyria's presence. Alaric, though still recovering from his injuries, proved to be a skilled guide and protector. He knew the land intimately, its secrets, its dangers, its magic. He taught Briar how to move silently through the forest, how to read the signs of the wild, how to sense the presence of magic. Briar, in turn, surprised herself with her adaptability and resilience. She learned quickly, drawing upon an inner strength she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer the timid widow of Little Puddleton. She was a warrior, a huntress, a partner to a king. As they journeyed, the bond between them deepened, strengthened by shared experiences, by mutual reliance, by the undeniable pull of their hearts. They would often find themselves talking late into the night, sharing stories, dreams, fears, and hopes. The physical attraction between them was a constant presence, a simmering tension that grew stronger with each passing day. They would steal glances, their hands would brush accidentally, their bodies would sway towards each other, drawn by an irresistible force. One evening, as they were camped near a small, crystal-clear stream, the tension finally reached its breaking point. They had just finished a simple meal, and the moon was casting a silvery glow upon the landscape. Alaric looked at Briar, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of desire and tenderness. "Briar," he said, his voice husky, I cannot deny my feelings any longer. I love you. Truly, deeply, madly." Briar's heart pounded in her chest. She had known this was coming. She had felt it growing between them, but hearing the words spoken aloud, it was overwhelming. I love you too, Alaric," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't believe it was possible, but it's true." He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch sending a wave of warmth spreading through her. "Then there is nothing holding us back," he said, his voice a low rumble.
"No professe, no curse, no obligation."
"Only us." He leaned in and kissed her, a passionate, consuming kiss that erased all doubts, all fears, all hesitations. It was a kiss that spoke of love, of desire, of a connection that transcended time and space. Briar responded with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. She had waited for this moment, longed for this moment, and now it was here. They broke the kiss, breathless, their eyes locked in a gaze of pure adoration. "There is still the matter of the soul bond," Alaric said, his voice slightly hesitant. "It is a part of us, a part of Eldoria's magic." Briar nodded. "I know," she said.
"And I'm ready."
"I'm ready to embrace it. To embrace you."
"Completely."
He smiled, a slow, captivating smile that transformed his features. "Then let's complete what we started," he said. But not in a cold, sterile alcove. Here, under the moon, by the water, surrounded by the magic of Eldoria. He led her to a soft patch of grass near the stream, and they lay down together, their bodies intertwined. The moon cast a silvery glow upon them, and the sound of the flowing water provided a soothing backdrop to their union. Alaric began to chant, his voice low and resonant, the words of the ancient incantation echoing through the night. But this time it was different. It wasn't a ritual of obligation, of duty, of prophecy. It was a ritual of love, of desire, of choice. Briar felt a surge of energy, a tingling sensation that spread through her body. But it wasn't the sharp, stinging pain she had felt before. It was a warm, pleasurable sensation, a feeling of connection, of completeness. As Alaric continued to chant, he began to caress her, his touch gentle and reverent. He kissed her neck, her shoulders, her breasts, his lips leaving a trail of fire wherever they touched. Briar responded with equal passion, her hands exploring his body, his muscles, his strength. She had never felt such desire, such freedom. The chanting reached its crescendo, and Alaric looked into her eyes, his golden gaze filled with a love that took her breath away. "I love you, Briar Rathmore," he said, his voice husky. "And I bind myself to you. Forever." "And I love you, Alaric of Eldoria," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "And I bind myself to you. Forever." And then they came together, their bodies joining in a dance of love, of desire, of magic. It was a union that transcended the physical, a merging of souls, a completion of their destiny. A serpent's kiss of a forgotten ritual, finally transformed. The wolf's embrace claimed. The moon shone down upon them. All of Eldoria seemed to sigh in collective relief around them. Chapter 15. Trials of Fire and Faith. The Whispering Glade was even more enchanting and perilous than the legends described. Ancient trees, their branches intertwined, formed a natural canopy overhead, filtering the sunlight and casting the glade in a perpetual twilight. The air hummed with a palpable energy, a sense of ancient magic that both thrilled and unnerved Briar. At the center of the glade stood a circle of massive stones, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings, radiating a faint, ethereal glow. "This is it," Alaric said, his voice hushed with reverence. "The heart of Eldoria's magic." He approached the stones cautiously, his hand resting on the hilt of a sword. Briar followed close behind, her senses on high alert. The air was thick with anticipation, with a sense of waiting. As they neared the center of the circle, the ground began to tremble. The air shimmered, and figures began to emerge from the stones, from the trees, from the very air itself. They were ethereal beings, shimmering and translucent, their forms shifting and swirling like mist. "The Guardians," Alaric said, his voice tight with tension. "They are testing us." The Guardians surrounded them, their eyes, if they could be called eyes, fixed upon them with an unnerving intensity. They did not speak, but Briar could feel their presence, their power, their judgment. One of the Guardians, larger and more imposing than the others, glided towards them. It stopped before Alaric, its form coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape. A voice, cold and ancient, echoed through the glade, not from the Guardian's form, but from the very air itself. "Who seeks the power of the Whispering Glade?" Alaric stepped forward, his head held high. "I am Alaric," he said, his voice strong and clear, "King of Eldoria. And this is Briar, my consort, my bonded partner. We seek to protect Eldoria, to prevent its misuse." The Guardian remained silent for a moment, its form shifting and swirling. Then the voice spoke again. "The curse of Hollowfong lingers. The taint of betrayal stains the land. Are you worthy to wield this power?" Alaric met the Guardian's gaze unflinchingly. "I am," he said. "I have suffered the consequences of that curse. I have fought against it. I have learned from it." The Guardian turned its attention to Briar. "And you, mortal? What is your claim to this power?" Briar felt a surge of fear, but she stood her ground. She remembered Alaric's words, his belief in her strength, her resilience, her connection to Eldoria. "I am bound to Alaric," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but gaining strength. "I am bound to Eldoria. I have sworn to protect it, to fight for it." The Guardian remained silent for a long moment, its gaze piercing, probing. Then the voice spoke again. "The path is fraught with peril. The power can corrupt. Are you willing to risk everything?" Alaric and Briar looked at each other, their eyes locking in a silent understanding. They had come this far, They had faced so much. They had found each other. They were not going to turn back now. "We are," they said in unison. The guardian seemed to nod, its form shifting and swirling. Then, it raised its hand, and a beam of light shot towards the center of the stone circle. The ground trembled again, and a small, pedestal-like stone rose from the earth. Upon it rested a single, crystal-clear stone, pulsing with a vibrant, inner light. "This is the Heartstone," the voice said, "the source of Eldoria's magic. It can amplify or it can destroy. Use it wisely." The guardians began to fade, their forms dissolving back into the stones, the trees, the air. The glade grew silent once more, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves and the soft hum of the Heartstone. Alaric and Briar approached the pedestal cautiously. They looked at the Heartstone, its beauty both mesmerizing and terrifying. "What do we do now?" Briar asked, her voice hushed with awe. Alaric reached out and gently touched the stone. A surge of energy passed through him, and he closed his eyes, his expression filled with a mixture of pain and exhilaration. "It speaks to me," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It shows me Lyria's plan." He opened his eyes, his gaze focused and determined. "She intends to use the other stones," he said, "to amplify Hollowfang's magic, to create a ritual that will tear Eldoria apart, and bind the remnants to her will." "Where?" Briar asked. "Where will she perform this ritual?" Alaric pointed towards a distant peak, shrouded in mist. "The Dragon's Tooth," he said. "A place of ancient power, a place tainted by darkness." He looked at Briar, his golden eyes filled with a fierce determination. "We have to stop her, Briar," he said. "We have to destroy the other stones, or somehow use the Heartstone to counter her magic." They had passed a trial by the ancient magic of the place, but the real trial still awaited them. They did not know how to fight Lyria, still. They just knew they must. "Let's go," Briar said. He nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Let's go," he repeated. And they were off. Chapter 16. The Heart's Unseen Scars. The journey to the Dragon's Tooth was even more treacherous than their previous trek. The landscape grew increasingly rugged, the air thinner and colder. They faced not only the natural obstacles of the terrain, but also the lingering effects of Hollowfang's curse, manifested in strange, distorted creatures and pockets of corrupted magic. Alaric, guided by the connection he had forged with the Heartstone, led them through the perilous landscape, his senses heightened, his awareness expanded. He could feel Lyria's presence, her growing power, her malevolent intent. Briar, despite her lack of magical abilities, continued to be a source of strength and support. She was resourceful, resilient, and fiercely protective of Alaric. She had embraced her role as his partner, his equal, his lover. But as they neared the Dragon's Tooth, a subtle shift began to occur in Alaric. The power of the Heartstone, while enhancing his abilities, also seemed to be affecting him. He became more withdrawn, more focused on the task at hand, more distant. Briar noticed the change, and it worried her. She remembered Lyra's warning about the soul bond, about its power to consume, to control, to destroy. Was the Heartstone, despite its pure nature, having a similar effect on Alaric? One evening, as they were camped in a small, sheltered cave, Briar decided to confront him. "Alaric," she said, her voice soft, "are you all right?" He looked at her, his golden eyes seeming to glow with an unnatural intensity. "I am fine," he said, his voice a low rumble. But Briar could see the tension in his posture, the subtle tremor in his hands, the distance in his gaze. "You seem different," she said. "Since we found the Heartstone. You're more withdrawn, more focused." He turned away from her, staring into the darkness of the cave. "I am connected to it," he said. "To Eldoria's magic. To Lyria's plan. I can feel it all around us." He paused, then added, his voice laced with a hint of coldness, "I must be strong, Briar. I must be ready. To face her. To defeat her." Briar felt a chill run down her spine. His words, while understandable, lacked the warmth, the tenderness, the love that she had come to expect from him. But at what cost, Alaric? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Are you losing yourself in this power? He turned back to her, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Losing myself? He repeated. I am finding myself, Briar. I am reclaiming my power. My destiny. He stepped closer to her, his gaze intense, almost predatory. Do you not trust me, Briar? He asked. Briar hesitated. She did trust him. She did love him, but she couldn't ignore the change she saw in him. The Heartstone, while a source of power, also seemed to be amplifying his darker aspects, his ambition, his ruthlessness. I do trust you, Alaric, she said, her voice wavering slightly. But I'm worried.
About you.
About us. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, but his touch, while familiar, lacked the tenderness she craved. There is nothing to worry about, Briar, he said, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic. I am in control. I am stronger than ever. And together we will prevail. He leaned in and kissed her, but the kiss, while passionate, felt different. It lacked the softness, the vulnerability, the love that had characterized their previous encounters. Briar responded, but her heart was filled with a growing unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the Alaric she loved was slipping away. They made love that night, but it was not the same. It was passionate, yes, it was intense, yes, but it lacked the connection, the intimacy, the soulfulness that had defined their previous union. As Briar lay in Alaric's arms afterwards, she felt a profound sense of loneliness, of loss. She had found love, she had found a home, she had found a destiny. But now she feared she was losing it all. She looked at Alaric, his face relaxed in sleep, his features softened. He looked peaceful, almost innocent. But Briar knew that beneath the surface, something was changing. She closed her eyes, tears welling up, and prayed that she was wrong. She prayed that the Alaric she loved would return, that the power of the Heartstone would not consume him. She prayed that their love, their bond, their destiny, would be strong enough to withstand the trials that still lay ahead. The scars from the curse, and from Hollowfang's initial betrayal seemed to reopen, in a way she could not understand. She only knew she felt them, deep inside. Chapter 17. A kingdom reborn, a love rekindled. The dragon's tooth loomed before them, a jagged peak shrouded in mist, its presence radiating a palpable sense of ancient power and dark energy. As they approached, Briar could feel Alaric growing increasingly tense, his focus narrowing, his connection to the Heartstone intensifying. She's here, he said, his voice a low growl. I can feel her. She's preparing the ritual. They moved cautiously, stealthily, using the cover of the mist and the rugged terrain to their advantage. They could hear the faint sound of chanting, echoing from the peak, a chilling reminder of Lyria's malevolent intent. As they neared the summit, they found a clearing, bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of stones, similar to the ones in the Whispering Glade, but these stones were corrupted, their surfaces pulsing with a dark, sickly energy. Lyria stood within the circle, her silver hair flowing around her like a shroud, her eyes blazing with a cold, triumphant fire. She was chanting, her voice strong and resonant, the words of the ancient incantation filling the air. Alaric moved to attack, but Briar stopped him, placing a hand on his arm. Wait, she said, her voice urgent.
Look.
She pointed towards the stones. They were not just amplifying Lyria's magic, they were also drawing energy from something else. From the land itself. Briar realized that Lyria's plan was not just to strengthen the curse, but to drain Eldoria of its life force, to twist its magic to her own will, to destroy and to remake. We can't just destroy the stones, Briar said. We need to sever the connection. We need to stop the flow of energy. Alaric looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and respect.
How?
He asked. Briar remembered the Heartstone, the pure, untainted source of Eldoria's magic. She remembered Alaric's connection to it, the power it had granted him. The Heartstone, she said. You can use it to counter her magic. to disrupt the ritual. Alaric hesitated. "It's risky, Briar," he said. "The Heartstone is powerful, but unpredictable. It could overwhelm me." Briar looked into his eyes, and she saw not just fear, but also doubt. The doubt that had been growing in him, the distance that had been forming between them. "I trust you, Alaric," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "I believe in you, in your strength, in your goodness." Her words, spoken with such conviction, seemed to break through the wall that had been building around him. He looked at her, and for the first time in days, she saw the Alaric she loved, the man who had captured her heart, the man who had chosen her. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "And I trust you, Briar," he said. "I believe in us." He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, focusing his mind, channeling the power of the Heartstone. He began to chant, his voice low and resonant, the words of a counter-incantation filling the air. The two chants clashed, creating a vortex of energy, a battle between light and darkness, between love and hate, between hope and despair. Briar watched, her heart pounding in her chest, as Alaric struggled against Lyria's power. He was strong, yes, but she was formidable. Lyria, seeing Alaric's interference, turned her attention towards him, her eyes blazing with fury. "You cannot stop me, Alaric," she shrieked. "I am too powerful." She unleashed a wave of dark energy aimed directly at him. But Alaric, empowered by the Heartstone, deflected the blow, sending it back towards the corrupted stones. The stones began to crack, to crumble, the dark energy dissipating. Lyria screamed in rage and frustration, her ritual faltering. Briar seized the opportunity. She rushed forward, towards the remaining stones, and began to pull them down, to disrupt their alignment, to sever the connection to the land. Alaric, seeing her actions, redoubled his efforts, channeling the Heartstone's power to cleanse the corrupted stones, to restore Eldoria's magic. Together, they fought, their love, their bond, their shared destiny, fueling their efforts. Finally, with a deafening roar, the last stone crumbled, and Lyria's ritual collapsed. The dark energy dissipated, and the clearing was bathed in a soft, golden light. Lyria, weakened and defeated, fell to her knees, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and despair. Alaric approached her, his expression grim, but not triumphant. He looked at her, not with anger, but with pity. "It's over, Lyria," he said, his voice weary. "Your ambition, your betrayal, it has brought you nothing but ruin." Lyria looked up at him, her face contorted with rage. "You may have won this battle, Alaric," she hissed, "but you will never truly be free. The curse, it lingers. It will always be a part of you." With a final, desperate cry, she lunged at Alaric, her hands reaching for his throat. But he was too quick. He stepped aside, and she stumbled, falling headfirst onto the sharp edge of a broken stone. A gasp, a sigh, and then silence. Lyria was gone. Alaric stood there for a long moment, staring at her lifeless body, his expression unreadable. Then, he turned towards Briar, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "It's over," he said, his voice hoarse. Briar rushed to his side, embracing him tightly. "It's over," she repeated, tears welling up in her eyes. They stood there, holding each other, for a long time, the silence broken only by the gentle whisper of the wind and the soft hum of the restored magic of Eldoria. As the mist began to clear, they saw a sight that took their breath away. The landscape around them was transforming, coming alive. The barren trees were blossoming, the withered grass was turning green, the air was filled with the songs of birds and the scent of wildflowers. Eldoria was reborn, and as the sun rose, casting a golden glow upon the land, Alaric turned to Briar, his eyes filled with a love that was stronger, deeper, more profound than ever before. "We did it, Briar," he said, his voice filled with awe. "We saved Eldoria. We saved each other." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that was not just passionate, but also healing. A kiss that sealed their bond, their love, their destiny. the kingdom reborn. And in that rebirth, their love, too, rekindled. Chapter 18. The Gathering Storm of Enemies. The restoration of Eldoria was not immediate, nor was it complete. The scars of Hollowfang's curse ran deep, and the land, like a wounded creature, needed time to heal. But with each passing day, the kingdom showed signs of recovery. The mist that had shrouded the land for centuries began to dissipate, revealing the full extent of Eldoria's beauty. Flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, trees reached towards the sky with renewed vigor, and the air was filled with the sounds of life. Alaric, with Briar by his side, worked tirelessly to rebuild his kingdom. He gathered the scattered remnants of his people, those who had been trapped in a state of suspended animation by the curse. They awoke, disoriented and confused, but filled with a sense of wonder and gratitude at the sight of their restored home. Briar, despite her lack of magical abilities, played a crucial role in the rebuilding process. Her knowledge of the outside world, her organizational skills, and her compassion proved invaluable. She helped to establish systems of governance, to organize resources, to heal the emotional wounds of her people. The bond between Alaric and Briar deepened with each passing day, strengthened by shared challenges, by mutual respect, by a love that had been tested and proven true. They ruled Eldoria together, not as king and consort, but as partners, as equals, as soulmates. But their peace was not to last. The defeat of Lyria had not eradicated all threats to Eldoria. There were others who coveted the kingdom's power, others who had been drawn to the land by the resurgence of its magic. One evening, as Alaric and Briar were walking through the newly restored gardens of the castle, a sentry approached them, his face etched with concern. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low, "we have visitors. A delegation from the Shadowlands." Alaric frowned. The Shadowlands were a neighboring realm, a dark and forbidding place ruled by a ruthless sorcerer named Mocker. Mocker had long coveted Eldoria's magic, and he had been a close ally of Hollowfang.
What do they want?
Alaric asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "They claim to offer congratulations," the sentry replied, "on your restoration of the kingdom. But there is something unsettling about them, Your Majesty. Their eyes, they are cold." Briar felt a shiver run down her spine. She had heard tales of Mocker, of his cruelty, his ambition, his insatiable hunger for power. "We must be cautious, Alaric," she said. "This could be a trap." Alaric nodded. "I agree," he said, "but we cannot refuse them entry. It would be seen as a sign of weakness, a provocation." He turned to the sentry. "Bring them to the throne room," he said.
"And be watchful.
Have guards posted everywhere." The sentry bowed and hurried away. Alaric and Briar exchanged a worried look. "I don't like this, Alaric," Briar said. "Mocker is not to be trusted." Alaric placed a comforting hand on her arm. "I know," he said, "but we will be prepared. We will face him together." They entered the throne room, a grand hall that had been painstakingly restored to its former glory. Alaric sat upon his throne, a massive chair carved from ancient wood and adorned with gold and jewels. Briar stood beside him, her hand resting on the arm of the throne, a symbol of their shared power and their unbreakable bond. The delegation from the Shadowlands entered, led by a tall, imposing figure clad in black robes. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes dark and piercing, his expression calculating. "Greetings, King Alaric," the figure said, his voice smooth and oily, but with an underlying hint of menace. "I am Kale, emissary of Mocker, ruler of the Shadowlands. We come to offer our congratulations on your remarkable achievement."
Alaric met Kale's gaze unflinchingly.
"Your congratulations are unexpected, Kale," he said, his voice cold and formal. "Given your master's past association with Hollowfang." Kale smiled, a cruel, mocking smile. "The past is the past, King Alaric," he said. "Mocker is a pragmatic ruler. He recognizes strength. He recognizes opportunity." He paused, then added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "and he sees both in Eldoria." Briar felt a surge of anger, but she kept her expression neutral. She knew that Kale was trying to provoke them, to test them. "What is it you want, Kale?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. Kale turned his attention to Briar, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Ah, the mortal queen," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "The key to Eldoria's restoration." He stepped closer, his gaze intense, almost predatory. "Mocker is intrigued by you, Briar Rathmore," he said. "By your resilience. By your connection to Alaric. By your potential." Briar met his gaze unflinchingly. "I am not interested in Mocker's intrigues," she said. "I am loyal to Eldoria. To Alaric. To my people." Kale smiled again, that cruel, mocking smile. "Loyalty is a fleeting thing, mortal queen," he said. "Power is eternal." He turned back to Alaric. "Mocker offers you a partnership, King Alaric," he said.
En alliance.
"Together, we can rule these lands. We can conquer our enemies. We can achieve unimaginable power." Alaric rose from his throne, his expression grim, his golden eyes blazing with anger. "I will never ally myself with Mocker," he said, his voice booming through the hall. "He is a tyrant, a sorcerer, a threat to all that is good and just." Kale's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. "Then you have chosen poorly, King Alaric," he said. "You have chosen war." With a swift movement, he drew a dagger from beneath his robes and lunged at Alaric. But Briar was faster. She stepped in front of Alaric, shielding him with her body, and raised her hand, channeling the power of their bond, the power of Eldoria. A wave of energy erupted from her, throwing Kale back, sending him crashing against the far wall of the throne room. The other members of the delegation drew their weapons, but the Eldorian guards, who had been waiting for this moment, surged forward, engaging them in battle. The throne room erupted in chaos, the clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, the raw power of magic, filling the air. Alaric, recovered from his surprise, drew his own sword and joined the fray, fighting alongside his guards, protecting his kingdom, protecting his love. The gathering storm of enemies was upon them. Chapter 19. The Battle for Eldoria's Soul. The battle in the throne room was fierce and brutal. The Eldorian guards, though outnumbered, fought with courage and determination, fueled by their loyalty to Alaric and Briar and by their love for their newly restored kingdom. Alaric, empowered by the Heartstone and his bond with Briar, fought like a man possessed, his sword flashing, his magic surging, his golden eyes blazing with a righteous fury. Briar, despite her lack of combat experience, proved to be a formidable force. She channeled the power of their bond, the power of Eldoria, deflecting attacks, shielding her allies, and even striking down enemies. She was no longer the timid widow of Little Puddleton. She was a queen, a warrior, a protector of her realm. Kale, recovering from Briar's initial attack, proved to be a skilled and ruthless opponent. He wielded dark magic with deadly precision, striking down several Eldorian guards with bolts of black energy. He moved with an unnatural speed and agility, dodging blows, deflecting attacks, his eyes fixed on Alaric with a burning hatred. "You cannot win, Alaric," Kale shouted, his voice echoing through the throne room. "Mocker's forces are vast. They will crush you. They will consume Eldoria."
Alaric met Kale's gaze unflinchingly.
"We will never surrender,"
he roared.
"We will fight to the last breath. We will protect our kingdom." He lunged at Kale, their swords clashing in a shower of sparks. They fought fiercely, their skills evenly matched, their determination unwavering. Briar, seeing Alaric engaged in a desperate struggle with Kale, knew that she had to do something to tip the balance. She remembered the Heartstone, the source of Eldoria's magic, the power that had helped them defeat Lyria. She closed her eyes, focusing her mind, channeling the energy of her bond with Alaric, drawing upon the power of the Heartstone. She felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins, a feeling of connection, of oneness with Eldoria. She opened her eyes, and they glowed with a golden light, similar to Alaric's. She raised her hand, and a wave of pure, white energy erupted from her, sweeping through the throne room. The energy struck the remaining members of the Shadowlands delegation, throwing them back, disarming them, stunning them. It also cleansed the throne room of the lingering dark magic, restoring a sense of peace and order. Kale, seeing his forces defeated, his eyes widened in disbelief and fear. He turned to flee, but Alaric was too quick. He blocked Kale's escape, his sword pointed at the emissary's throat. "It's over, Kale," Alaric said, his voice cold and hard. "Your master's ambition will not prevail." Kale glared at Alaric, his face contorted with hatred. "You may have won this battle, Alaric," he hissed. "But the war is just beginning. Mocker will destroy you. He will claim Eldoria. And you and your mortal queen will be nothing but dust." With a final, desperate cry, Kale lunged at Alaric, attempting to stab him with a hidden dagger. But Alaric, anticipating the move, parried the blow and, with a swift movement, plunged his sword into Kale's heart. Kale gasped, his eyes widening in shock, and then slumped to the floor, dead. The throne room fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the survivors. The battle was over. Eldoria had prevailed. Alaric sheathed his sword and turned to Briar, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and love. "Briar," he said, his voice hoarse, "you saved us. Again." Briar smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "We saved each other," she said. "We saved Eldoria." They embraced, holding each other tightly, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and the lingering effects of the battle. But their victory was bittersweet. They knew that this was just the beginning. Mocker's threat remained, and they would have to prepare for a larger, more devastating conflict. As the Eldorian guards tended to the wounded and cleared the throne room of the dead, Alaric and Briar stood together, looking out at their kingdom, their faces grim, but determined. "We must gather our allies," Alaric said. "We must prepare for war." Briar nodded.
"We will," she said.
"We will face this together. We will protect Eldoria, no matter the cost." They knew that the battle for Eldoria's soul had just begun, and that the challenges ahead would be greater than anything they had faced before. But they were ready. They were united. They were in love. And they would fight, side by side, for their kingdom, for their future, for their destiny. They would need all of Eldoria to fight. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The war with the Shadowlands was swift and brutal. Mocker, enraged by the death of his emissary and the defeat of his forces in Eldoria, unleashed the full might of his army upon the kingdom. Legions of dark creatures, twisted by forbidden magic, poured across the border, laying waste to everything in their path. Alaric, with Briar by his side, rallied the forces of Eldoria. The people, inspired by their king and queen and by the restoration of their land, fought with courage and determination. They were outnumbered, yes, but they were fighting for their homes, their families, their freedom. Alaric, empowered by the Heartstone and his bond with Briar, proved to be a formidable leader. He led his troops into battle, his sword flashing, his magic surging, his golden eyes blazing with a righteous fury. He was a beacon of hope, a symbol of resistance, a king worthy of his crown. Briar, despite her lack of combat experience, played a crucial role in the war effort. She used her connection to Eldoria, to the Heartstone, to heal the wounded, to bolster the morale of the troops, to disrupt the enemy's magic. She was a queen, a healer, a protector of her realm. The final battle took place on the plains before Eldoria Castle, a vast, open expanse where the fate of the kingdom would be decided. The two armies clashed in a maelstrom of steel, magic, and blood. The ground trembled, the sky darkened, and the air was filled with the cries of the living and the dying. Alaric and Briar fought side by side, their love, their bond, their shared destiny, fueling their efforts. They were a force to be reckoned with, a symbol of hope against the encroaching darkness. Mocker, a towering figure clad in black armor, his face hidden behind a menacing helmet, watched the battle from a nearby hill, his eyes burning with a cold, malevolent fire. He was a master of dark magic, a sorcerer of immense power, and he was confident of victory. But as the battle raged, Mocker began to sense that something was wrong. His forces, despite their superior numbers, were being pushed back. The Eldorians were fighting with an unexpected ferocity, their magic stronger than anticipated. He saw Alaric, a golden figure amidst the chaos, his sword a blur of motion, his magic a beacon of light. And he saw Briar, standing beside him, her eyes glowing with a similar power, her presence a source of strength and inspiration. Mocker realized that the bond between Alaric and Briar was the key to Eldoria's resistance. It was their love, their connection, their shared magic that was fueling their efforts, that was turning the tide of the battle. He decided to intervene directly. He descended from the hill, his black armor gleaming, his dark magic crackling around him. He strode towards the center of the battle, his eyes fixed on Alaric and Briar. "Alaric," he roared, his voice amplified by magic, echoing across the battlefield. "Your defiance ends here. I will crush you. I will claim Eldoria, and your mortal queen will be my prize." Alaric met Mocker's gaze unflinchingly. "You will not prevail, Mocker," he shouted. "Eldoria will never surrender. We will fight to the last breath." He charged towards Mocker, his sword raised, his golden eyes blazing with defiance. Briar followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest, her hand reaching for Alaric's, their fingers intertwining. The two sorcerers clashed, their magic colliding in a blinding explosion of light and darkness. The ground shook, the air crackled, and the battle around them seemed to fade into insignificance. It was a battle of wills, a battle of power, a battle of destinies. Alaric, empowered by the Heartstone and his bond with Briar, fought with the strength of a king, the courage of a lion, the love of a man who had found his soulmate. Mocker, fueled by his ambition, his hatred, his dark magic, fought with the ruthlessness of a tyrant, the cruelty of a monster, the desperation of a man who knew he was losing. The battle raged, their powers clashing, their bodies straining, their wills locked in a desperate struggle. Briar, seeing Alaric struggling against Mocker's overwhelming power, knew that she had to do something to help him. She closed her eyes, focusing her mind, channeling the energy of their bond, drawing upon the full power of the Heartstone. She felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins, a feeling of connection, of oneness with Eldoria, with Alaric, with the very essence of life. She opened her eyes, and they glowed with a brilliant, golden light. She raised her hands, and a wave of pure, white energy erupted from her, striking Mocker with the force of 1,000 suns. Mocker screamed in agony, his body convulsing, his dark magic shattering. He staggered back, his armor crumbling, his helmet falling away, revealing his face twisted with pain, with hatred, with defeat. Alaric, seeing his opportunity, seized the moment. He raised his sword, channeling the last of his strength, and with a mighty roar, plunged it into Mocker's heart. A blinding flash of light, a deafening roar, and then silence. Mocker was gone. The battle was over. Eldoria had won. Alaric and Briar stood together, amidst the carnage of the battlefield, their bodies exhausted, their spirits triumphant. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with a love that had been tested, a love that had endured, a love that had saved a kingdom. Alaric took her in his arms. The final confrontation was done. Epilogue. The years that followed were a golden age for Eldoria. With Mocker defeated and the Shadowlands in disarray, peace returned to the land. The kingdom prospered, its magic flourishing, its people thriving. Alaric and Briar ruled wisely and justly, their love for each other and for their kingdom a beacon of hope for all. The scars of the past remained, of course. The memories of Hollowfang's curse, of Lyria's betrayal, of Mocker's invasion, would never fully fade. But they served as a reminder of the price of freedom, of the importance of vigilance, of the enduring power of love. Alaric and Briar rebuilt Eldoria, not just physically, but also spiritually. They fostered a culture of unity, of compassion, of respect for all living things. They honored the ancient traditions of Eldoria, but they also embraced new ideas, new ways of thinking, inspired by Briar's knowledge of the outside world. Their bond, forged in the crucible of danger and solidified by their shared experiences, remained as strong as ever. They were not just king and queen, not just partners, not just soulmates. They were one. Their thoughts, their feelings, their very essence were intertwined, inseparable. They had children, a son and a daughter, who inherited the best qualities of both their parents: Alaric's strength, courage, and sense of justice, and Briar's intelligence, compassion, and resilience. The children were raised with a deep love for Eldoria, for its magic, for its people, and for the legacy of their parents. As the years turned into decades, Alaric and Briar began to feel the effects of time. Alaric's golden eyes, though still bright, lost some of their intensity. His dark hair, once thick and lustrous, began to thin and turn silver. His body, though still strong, bore the scars of countless battles. Briar, too, aged, but her beauty, while transformed, did not diminish. Her wrinkles were a testament to a life well lived, a life filled with love, with adventure, with purpose. Her eyes, though softened by time, still held the spark of intelligence, of compassion, of the unwavering spirit that had drawn Alaric to her in the first place. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of their castle, watching the sun set over the restored landscape of Eldoria, Alaric turned to Briar, his hand gently cupping her face. "Briar," he said, his voice soft, his eyes filled with a love that had only deepened with time, I have no regrets. I have lived a long and extraordinary life, and the greatest blessing of that life has been you." Briar smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "And you, Alaric," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "have been my greatest adventure, my greatest love, my destiny." They kissed, a slow, tender kiss that spoke of a lifetime of shared experiences, of unwavering devotion, of a love that transcended time and space. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow upon the land, they felt a sense of peace, of completion. They had lived, they had loved, they had saved a kingdom. And as they closed their eyes, their hands clasped tightly together, they knew that their story, the story of Eldoria, the story of their love, would live on, whispered among the ancient stones, carried on the wind, remembered forever. Their souls, bound together for eternity, now gently began to return to the magic from whence they came. Together. Always. The end.